Various political types in the United States are very excited about the recent primary win for New York mayor by the young insurgent Zohran Mamdani. He came from behind, beat the establishment candidate Andrew Cuomo, who, in spite of the fact that he had previously left the job in disgrace, this being the Trump era, that wasn't held to be disqualifying. As always, when such things happen, the most passionate ideologues in the various political wings and factions of the various political parties seem to be the worst in analysing why they happened and what they should learn from them. Because usually ideological people see the world through such a strong, distorting lens, they only really see what they want to see. So in this case, the most progressive wing of the Democrats are saying, see, here is someone with strong progressive views and whose views were popular with the voters. That means this could work for us nationwide if we only do the same thing. The establishment within the party are saying, uh-oh, Cuomo fought a bad campaign, that let a radical through the primary, which will be a real liability in the general election unless we can get Cuomo back into it, because, for reasons I don't entirely understand, that is still a thing. Anyway, the people of MAGA-land are, of course, saying, OMG, a rabid, foaming at the mouth communist is about to take charge of New York. Run for your lives, everybody. And they're just basically looking forward to the idea that they have someone who they can point at doing crazy things for the next 3 or 4 years. The only one of those that has some overlap with reality is version 2, because yes, Cuomo did run a poor campaign, and let's face it, was a poor choice for candidates anyway. But that's not the biggest part of it, because any of the other candidates that looks and feels like him, in other words, the pillars of the Democratic Party establishment, would almost certainly have lost as well, and for the same reasons. Basically, the majority of modern politicians have just become terrible at campaigning. Now, we have to make an exception for Donald Trump. Trump is terrible at governing. Yes, not exactly a standout human being you might want to be stranded on a desert island with. Yes, but he is amazing at campaigning. At least his natural style suits the current age. I mean, he would have been terrible running, for instance, against Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, because his style wouldn't have been tolerated for 2 seconds in those days. And a genius campaigner would adapt their style to a degree to fit the needs of the moment. Trump shows no signs of being able to do that. He just does exactly what he does. In the 2020s, it just turns out that that works to considerable effect. But he is helped by the hopelessness of those campaigning against him. And you can spot it when you see an example of someone doing it better. In principle, Cuomo's opponent, Mamdani, should have had so much historical baggage, it would have been difficult for him to break through. I mean, he'd been all on board with the defund the police moment, probably the most disastrous campaign slogan ever adopted by progressives that did their party standing with the public a huge amount of damage, and various other things that should have dragged him down. But it didn't really much affect him. Instead, he came across as young, with energy, a fresh voice. He used social media in a much more authentic way, being out and about in the community, talking to a wide range of people, listening to them, and using the clips of those conversations to get people seeing him do that. He was getting them to tell him how things were for them. He wasn't just broadcasting, telling them why he was the absolute right choice for New York. Listening, then focusing on the core message of what they were saying to him, which was about the cost of living, affordability. That approach made his ideological framework less of an issue one way or the other. Wasn't so much the specific nature of his policies and ideology that might underpin them, it was that he came across as having an authentic voice. He was speaking to what he believed, without all the shilly-shallying reluctance that establishment politicians have before they can commit themselves to anything that can't be denied or reversed later. And that mattered more, in many ways, than the specifics of what he believed. except that he could show the line between what he was proposing to do and the affordability issue that was affecting the people that he was speaking to. And it plugged into the phenomenon that, ironically, yes, Donald Trump has demonstrated. If you can persuade people that you're on their side, that you're fighting for them, they will mind less what the details of the policies are, at least until you get into power, and then they feel for themselves whether those policies are benefiting them or not. Now, I have no insights into what Mamdani would actually be like as a New York mayor. He might be great, he might be terrible. I think if he can keep doing what he's been doing on the campaign, in other words, staying close to the people that he's serving so he hears how things are playing out, he should do well because he will self-correct on his mistakes. But if he doesn't do that, if that was just for the election campaign, then he will disappoint all of those voters currently infused by him as he becomes more and more out of touch. The point is, the man showed the Democrats, and maybe the anti-Trump Republicans as well, if any of them are still paying attention, how to politically campaign. Seems to be a skill that modern politicians have lost, but the modern populist movements are reveling in. So in the UK, for instance, we have a government with a massive majority, Keir Starmer's Labour Party. And then we have an insurgent populist party, Nigel Farage's Reform UK. The latter has just got 5 MPs, should be pretty near to invisible by the standard logic of parliamentary politics. Instead, Starmer's Labour Party are permanently on the back foot, adopting policies utterly failing to campaign for them, and so then ending up backtracking and U-turning in a way you'd expect of a minority government. In the meantime, Reform UK, led by Farage, is often to be found dominating the national discussion and appearing a much bigger force than the reality as a result. So it is that, according to current polls, Reform UK, this tiny party, is leading the national opinion polls. There are various factors involved, not just one, to be fair, not least the total collapse for now of the previous governing Conservative Party. But the populists are setting the agenda on immigration, on so-called two-tier policing, which isn't a thing, but many people now believe it for a fact, on so-called net zero madness, which claims a bevy of things that aren't true, but are entering the popular consciousness as intuitively correct nonetheless. And I've seen that latter one at work in my own community. So recently there have been public consultations being held about new electricity pylons needed to distribute energy that has been generated from offshore wind power. A campaign group has sprung up against it, and it is being fed by an anonymous group operating a website where they claim to be so-called citizen scientists and where they provide lots of anti-net zero propaganda to feed into this local single-issue group. It's the same device I've seen numerous times before. So, for example, on COVID, there was a website of so-called retired doctors that spread very credible-looking promotional material for every quack medicine supposedly good for COVID-19, such as ivermectin. A remarkably sophisticated website, with very special attention paid by the web design experts who knew exactly what they were doing to give zero clues as to the ownership or authorship of the site, which is pretty good for some retired doctors, you would think. And an online community then of so-called freethinkers who remain astonishingly incurious as to the parentage of the resources they're promoting, whether it might be the work of a hostile foreign government or a corporation with a vested interest. No interest in that at all. And so in my community, on an issue that previously there'd been relatively strong consensus across the country, whether or not that individual local proposal is right or not, the general cause has been supported, you have professional campaign groups inserting well-crafted disinformation with a view to radicalising people, to turning them from not wanting a pylon to be placed next to their home into being committed supporters of populism, having been fed credible-seeming garbage by forces never to be revealed. And there's nobody there opposing it, putting the case, challenging this process that's going on, presumably in lots of other communities across the country, all at the same time. and the political figures that then use it, they can hoover up all that sentiment and associate themselves with it. And all of it, of course, well suited to the clips, the memes, the 140 character snippets that are the standard for social media. And it helps for their purposes that they mostly work by provoking outrage against other people, the sort of thing that's easy to do with disinformation. Politicians of integrity don't have that, of course, and should not have that available to them. But then this is the point. Right now, the populists are running rings around conventional politicians whose skills may be suited to the age when such figures gave speeches in front of large live audiences. Maybe. Maybe a handful of them are good for the hand-to-hand TV interview combat. I mean, not many of them, but a few. But they seem completely unable to cut through on any issue to any target audience whatsoever in a way that actually works. Arguably, the main feature that made Zohran Mamdani worth talking about is that he demonstrated one way that clearly does work. Nothing to do with who he is, nothing to do with how much money he was able to raise, nothing to do with name recognition or celebrity or even, yes, ideology. He just went out into the community, listened, reflected back with integrity, made all of that visible via the media available to him. In other words, he campaigned. Now, why didn't Cuomo do more of that, even later in the campaign when it became obvious where the momentum was? Well, by all accounts, I wasn't there to see it myself. Firstly, he was scared to do unscripted work because it was feared that journalists or citizens might well ask him about his previous scandals. Well, yes. Maybe that's why they should be considered as disqualifying for a potential candidate. But anyway, secondly, he just didn't believe that his establishment approach, doing what it had always done, powered by the superior amount of top donor fundraising, as it always had been, that it could possibly be beaten. Certainly not by a young upstart. Arrogance and excuses, in other words. Exactly what I would say is most often offered up by the conventional politicians across Europe and America as to why they can't do more to connect with the people in their communities. And exactly why, right now, the populist wave, whether of the Farage right or now as well the Mamdani left, is in danger of sweeping them aside. And now you might be confused. Am I saying that would be a bad thing, or might that even be a good thing? Well, in the sense that populism is about being connected to the real day-to-day concerns of the electorate, seems to me we could do with more of that in mainstream politics. We need fresh, authentic voices, and if they stay connected to the people they serve, by and large, they will do well enough to make a difference. With the type of populism that is offering easy solutions to complex problems based on lies, disinformation, and provoking outrage against the other, whether that be shadowy elites or immigrants or whoever the enemy of the week may be. YouTubers, I expect, will get out there in turn. Then that needs to be challenged. If they are allowed to radicalize people unchallenged, you will lose the basis for your democracy, a process that we can see in action as we have been describing so much in the last few months. Whether they are of the left or of the right, personally, I don't care that much. I'm very much of the centre, but whatever your political perspective, if it deserves to stand, it should be able to be supported by the truth. Any political party, personality or philosophy that thrives by spreading fear and anger based on lies, that's when you know you're on the wrong side. Can't believe that even needs saying, but this is the world we live in now.